course, we know that rural America is not just one thing. It's very wide, it's very diverse, and Megan and Sarah will talk about this. But it represents a few things in common. In population density is going to be lower. Distances to basic services are frequently going to be farther. Infrastructure may be problematic, and that's both physical infrastructure, schools, churches, hospitals, etc., and human infrastructure. Fewer people to kind of get the same jobs done within a community. Those are some of the common issues, and then it breaks out very differently from place to place, with a lot of those factors playing out in different ways. And my role will just be to sort of nod sagely from time to time, and I've gotten pretty good at that. But I do want to first of all say how Sarah is a geographer by training, and I just got to say, if you don't have a geographer on staff, I really recommend it. It's a good thing to have, and I've really enjoyed working with Sarah to further develop the data that we've used. And we have perceptions about what happens in rural places, and then we can test those assumptions. There are a million assumptions about what rural America is like. And if you look at data, you can get a better picture. For example, interesting data sets that show that rural young people actually can do better economically later in life than urban young people, stuff like that that is contradictory. And so Megan and Sarah can help us understand how you don't have to take these assumptions about what rural America is. You can look at facts to help you. And then with Megan, Headwaters Economics is a unique and important institution based in Montana, serving the West primarily, but with a national footprint. And what I really enjoy about them is how they both work on the ground in local communities and have this larger research component, and they each inform the other and make for a very solid view of what's happening in rural America. So I think Megan's going to go first, but thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Tim. I appreciate the glowing intro, and I'm really excited to be here today and to be talking to all of you. Let me get my screen shared. Can I get a thumbs up that people can see? All right, awesome. So my goal for this presentation today is to introduce you to some free tools that excuse me, you all can use to inform your reporting. And I'm going to touch on some resources, and we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A, but I want to say up front that I'm happy to follow up with folks afterwards, because we're sitting on a lot of data and a lot of tools, and I'm not going to have time to go into all of them today. But just a little bit of background on Headwaters Economics, although Tim just gave a great introduction of how we work. We believe that decisions are best made when they're well informed by solid data and objective research. So all of our work sort of goes to support that. So we provide technical assistance, we conduct original research, and kind of our bigger mission is to democratize access to this information and democratize access to data through these free online tools. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on today, or that tools part. And we often serve as a resource for journalists, for data context for stories, or help finding or interpreting relevant data for what you're working on. And we are based in Montana, but we do work across the country with a particular focus on rural and underserved communities. So that's really where our expertise lies. And I'm an economist at Headwaters Economics, and the tools I'm going to talk about today are what I use for my research. So first I'm going to talk about our tools, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of demonstration of a tool and show you some features that we think that will be especially helpful for journalists covering rural places. And I'm going to try to target it sort of both for folks who are just kind of casually interested in data, and also show some kind of backdoor things for folks who really like to get their hands dirty. And then I'm going to hand it over to Sarah. So in summary, we have a whole bunch of tools. They're all free. We put a lot of work into making them easy to use and easy to access. And they cover the whole US at several different levels of geography, including tribal areas, whole states, counties, communities, census tracts, kind of depending on the tool. They're designed to be easy to use, but like I said, we do have kind of these ways to dig into the data that dig a little bit deeper. And so we provide the data, but we also like to include interpretation and some context, like why do these data points matter? Why are we including these particular metrics, and why? And so our tools are designed to shine a light on kind of these four main buckets of inquiry. We highlight economic transitions and context. So say a community shifting from resource extraction to something else. This is a great way to dig into these data. We highlight demographic changes and trends that are happening. We look at natural hazards, especially wildfire and flooding. And then our tools are designed to help to be able to look for inequities within all of these buckets. And we pull data from dozens of sources. So we generate very little primary data ourselves, but we draw from a lot of different, primarily federal sources. And if you went to collect all these data yourselves, as I'm sure plenty of you have done, you know, it's really time consuming and can be pretty tedious. But so our goal is to compile all of this stuff, all this data. We update it as soon as it's available, usually within the first 30 days since data is released. And we make sure to cite all of our sources. So, you know, helpful for readers and editors, so folks know you're not making this stuff up. So we have several data tools to make it easier to access these data about specific communities, and it's really very community focused. So if you're interested in a particular place, that's how these things are designed. And we only build tools when we do have wall-to-wall coverage across the country. And so it's not focused on a particular state. We try to make sure that there are no gaps in any of these. So the economic profile system is what I'm going to focus on today. It's really a great place to find information about economic trends, demographics, employment and income. There's a fair amount of information in here about housing, which I'm going to talk about in a sec. Our neighborhoods at, let's see, our neighborhoods at risk tool is a great resource to see where climate change will have the greatest impact in communities, where we overlay climate projections and socioeconomic data. And communities have been using this to prioritize the neighborhoods where they want to invest their resources to help their residents adapt to climate change. Let's see, our wildfire risk to communities tool summarizes wildfire risk in every community around the country, including kind of putting it into context. You can see if a community is particularly high, particularly low, and what communities can do about it. Sorry, my little highlights are all messed up. Let's see. And then the Rural Capacity Index maps where communities have been struggling to access federal and state grants due to a lack of staffing. And so I don't think I'm going to have time to touch on this today, but I think this can be, it's a really fascinating tool to kind of play around with, because you can see a lot of, right, it's a lot of the rural communities that really pop up because they don't have the staffing, they don't have the grant writers to be able to access those federal and state resources. And then finally, our agency tools, which we've developed in partnership with the Forest Service, the BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service. Those are designed to highlight the socioeconomic conditions around for the communities that border those public lands. And as I mentioned before, I'm happy to follow up on any of these if your interest has been piqued. Okay, now it's time for our live demo. So wish me luck, because I swear something always happens when I go to do this. Okay. Okay, so the first thing, this is just our website. And so we want to look for the tools menu up here, and we can click on that. And all of our analysis tools are on this page. So I'm going to focus on the economic profile system today, but neighborhoods at risk, wildfire risk to communities, all of those specific tools can be accessed through this page. So I'm going to select a particular location. In this case, I'm going to use the town of Grants, New Mexico, which is a place where we have some projects going on. And we pop up to this landing page. And so this is a great spot if you just need some kind of quick hit data points to set context. These quick facts over here are really handy for looking at employment sectors, median household income, how much, what the employment distribution is, the racial and ethnic diversity and education levels. If you just need sort of those like little quick hit things answered. We also always, because I think it's essential to put things into context and to understand, like, is this number high? Is this number low? So we always have this reference here. But let's say, you know, for the United States, maybe you're not so much interested in that. You really want to see, well, how does Grants, New Mexico compare to other communities in New Mexico? And I can start typing in New Mexico, and I can leave it at that to see how Grants compares to the rest of the state. But maybe I'm really interested in understanding how Grants, which is a really small town, how it compares to other small communities across the state. So I think this is a really important feature to highlight for this audience, that within all of these, you can compare to the non-metro parts of the state where you're working in. So I'll click on that non-metro, and we can see, and see, this is where like the live demo and it doesn't work. But we can do this comparison to the non-metro parts of the state. And then I just want to highlight down here in this corner, we have a really short citation. And then if you click on this, it'll take you to a link if you want the longer citation. So once I entered Grants in here, you can see that a bunch of different reports, types of reports popped up. And so I'm going to go ahead and download the demographics report for Grants. Oh, and I also want to highlight, you can add, this is where we can add more places. Like, say I'm interested in a community, a bigger town down the road, Gallup, New Mexico. So I want to have both of those in here and see, I want to see how those two compare. Say, for example, I'm working on a housing study or a housing story. So I want to download those selected locations here. Again, my comparison, my reference community or my reference geography is the non-metro part of New Mexico. And again, I can change that here. And we can download a PDF or Excel. In this case, I'll say Excel. And I'm just, this is, I was joking that this is sort of like when Julia Child, if anybody here has watched that, like she would put in the recipe and then pull out like the already cooked turkey. So this is where I'm just going to pull out the already cooked turkey. But those reports generate themselves really quickly. The data is all housed on our server, and voila, here's the turkey. So this is what pops up. For the demographic profile, you can see those geographies that we searched, what our comparison was. On our About page, we have some information about how it was developed, the funding sources, and some contact information for us. And then we have the table of contents, which tells you all the types of information that's contained in this report. So with demographics, we have information on population, age, and gender. race and ethnicity, tribal communities, some information about employment, different measures of income and poverty, some social characteristics like educational attainment and language, around housing, which I'll get to in a second. We have descriptive characteristics about the housing supply and affordability. And then lastly, two things I want to highlight. At the end of all these reports, we have kind of a benchmarking page where we just summarize graphically how these geographies compare to the communities, compared to our reference communities. So in this case, non-metro New Mexico. And then on the last page, we have all of our data sources and methods and notes for everything that we've talked about in the paper. So for housing characteristics, I just want to highlight this as an example. So for all of these pages, on one, we report the data tabularly, both in the levels up at the top and then as percentages, and then a chart at the bottom that kind of summarizes the top line findings. So we have data for Grants, New Mexico on their housing characteristics, Gallup, New Mexico, the combined geography, and then how those relate or how those compare to non-metro New Mexico communities. One thing I want to draw your attention to, you can see that some numbers are in black, some are in orange, and some are in red. And this is a nod to the fact that data quality can get a little thin, especially if we're working in really rural places or a really fine geography. And so we have some more notes on this, and I'm happy to talk about it in detail, but kind of the short answer, if you're running these reports and you're just seeing a lot of red, our solution is to expand the geography or to kind of go up a level of aggregation. So in this case, because we have so many of those vacant housing units, those different measures of vacant housing units that are in red, I would just aggregate and only report on vacant housing units, just as an example. And then the other housing page that we have goes into more housing affordability. So what the median rent is that people are paying, median mortgage cost, and the share of households that are paying more than 30% of their income on rent or mortgages. And then on the facing page, like all of these, we have our why we measured this, what exactly it is that we're measuring, and why it matters, and why we think it's important. Okay, now quick, I want to show you another report. And so for this one, say I'm interested in economic trends, and I want to see what is happening in this county. Now for our economic data, if I'm interested in like industry transitions, in this case, in this community or these communities, historically, they've had a lot of coal production, and that might be changing now. And these data are only available at the county level. So I'm going to get rid of these two geographies. And I'm just going to search for Cibola County, which is the county where Grants is located. And I'm going to download our socioeconomic trends report. So when I do that, and you'll see also the download button suggests other reports that might be of interest, and it can download for those geographies at the same time. Now, my Julia Child turkey. Okay, so different report, but similar structure, where we have the cover page, our about, the table of contents that highlights all the different types of information that's in here. And this is much more, this is a longer term summary. And I'm going to jump to this earnings by industry page, because I'm really interested in what's been happening over time, what sectors have been dominating the community or dominating the economy. And in this case, what I really want to draw your attention to, and this is for the folks on the call who really like to get their hands dirty. So again, we report the data, we have some summary charts, but then if you look over here, we hide this just so it's not messy, but all of the underlying data is all in here for all of our reports. So if you want to do your own analysis, you can go ahead and do that. You can also, we report, say there's a new policy, or say a mine closed in a certain year. It closed not in 2010, but maybe it closed in 2015. You can change that and it'll change the numbers in the report. So you can, if that's a different time period that's of more interest to you, you can look at that. Okay. Go back to some slides. And then, just quickly, I've only covered a fraction of the tools. As you can see, there's a whole pile of stuff on our website, and this is my contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out. We love being a resource to reporters. And in addition to all these data tools, we do conduct a lot of original research and are often or regularly updating our data. So we send out our newsletter about 6 times a year. If you want to use this QR code to subscribe, you can stay on top of our updates. And with that, I will hand it over to Sarah.
Okay, thank you, Megan. I use Headwaters reports all the time for either pulling like longer data to analyze or just like pulling quick data points. It's really helpful. And when I was preparing for what I wanted to talk about, I was a little bit torn between either would I want to go into the nitty-gritty detail of what Megan said of getting your hands dirty in the data, or would I want to do something a little bit more broad? And so I figured that kind of a broader take on how to find a storyline in a data set is probably going to be more appealing to more people. But with that said, you can also reach out to us, and my personal email is sarah@dailyyonder.com if you have other questions about data journalism that are more specific, and then we'll have time for questions at the end of this as well. But I think what might be the most helpful for most of you is we're going to include some data sets that you might want to look into for yourself in the post show notes at the end of this webinar. I'm going to go over a few of those and give some examples of how I use them. But I don't know, when I'm at a conference or a webinar, I'm talking to other journalists, sometimes like the thing that's the most helpful is getting an idea for a new data set and then just seeing an example of how another journalist has used it to tell a compelling story. And so I hope that I'll be able to impart some advice along those lines. Yeah, thanks, Tatum, for putting my email in the chat there. So the first thing that I want to point out is that whenever I approach a data set and I don't know what the story is going to be yet, and I don't know what I'm going to find, I always try to make a comparison. And so at the Daily Yonder, since we're a national publication about rural America, my first go-to is to make a comparison between rural and urban at the national level. So I'm just like looking at non-metropolitan counties and metropolitan counties. And if I'm looking at an economic data set or a demographic one or whatever it is, I'm going to say, what's the difference between the two? That's a really, maybe seemingly obvious way to approach one, but one of our most successful comparisons and long-running comparisons of rural and urban data was on COVID. So at the beginning of the pandemic, Tim started tracking COVID cases, deaths, and hospitalizations. The CDC used to release weekly reports at the county level that we would use. And so by the time that the CDC stopped creating data sets that were that fine geographically, that was about almost a year ago now, we had like over 100 weeks of weekly reports on the difference between rural and urban health related to COVID. So taking advantage of regularly released data reports is a really helpful way to like always know that you're going to have a story. So during, the height of the pandemic, we knew like, okay, every week we're going to have a red zone report, which is what Tim named them. So another option, if you're not writing from a national rural angle, is maybe maybe you're not a journalist either. You're doing like community outreach or something else at the local level. It would be interesting to compare your community either to the national trend or to utilize the Headwaters data sets that Megan used to look at the national rural trend. Okay, so if you're a rural community, how does that compare to the national rural trend on a certain topic? So another thing that we do at the Daily Yonder is track employment levels on a semi-regular basis, because the Bureau of Labor Statistics releases county level employment data every month. We just found that in an article I think I published 2 days ago, that rural places haven't recovered from pandemic losses in employment yet, while urban counties have exceeded pre-pandemic levels. So if we find a data set that we think really hits on the rural angle really well, then we know that we have something to report on a regular basis. If a federal agency like the BLS is going to release data monthly, we know we're going to have something to compare rural and urban together, and then we know how we're going to use that data set because we've done it before, and then we're going to compare what we found in the latest data set to what we found last time, and so we can kind of do it change over time analysis as well as a geographic one. And then another data set that we like to use are the population estimates released annually by the census. And so these are just basic, just like population numbers, like births and deaths and in and out migration every year at the county level. So we'll write a story about how the rural population changed in the last year. And so this past year, when they just released 2023 data, I think the latest data was 2022, but the good news is that rural populations, they increased for the first time in several decades. And so that was an interesting article to do. So I think it's also, and I won't go into too much detail about this, but it's also really important to think about how you're going to define rural. You all know, if you're interested in rural news, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but it's not a binary. It's not all agreed upon either. Economists and statisticians and geographers will disagree about what's the best definition to use. I think there's probably a dozen different technical definitions of rural that you can use that would be suitable for different things. And we could host an entire month of webinars on defining rural. So I'm not going to go too much into it, but I think it's important to note that you need to give some thought into how you're going to define it and be able to justify why you think that's the best way for you to define it. And so I don't know, Tim, do you have any wisdom on defining rural? We've published a few things about how we define rural that you can check out at the Daily Yonder, but it could be controversial subject. If you have any other questions about how we do it too, you guys can put it in the chat and we'll talk about it in the Q&A. But
briefly on how to define rural, which there's never been a brief discussion about how to define rural. But I do think from a local news standpoint, I might compare my county to the rest of Tennessee where I live, and I'd get one type of story. It might also be interesting to take the type of metropolitan or non-metropolitan area I live in and compare that to similar counties across the state or the U.S. And the reason, and I think that's something I, as a journalist, didn't really think about doing too much. I'm focused on my county, my town. But what I think rural places have some difficulty catching is that there is a policy relationship between what's going on in my community and other rural communities. And it's not, if my economy is going bad, it's not my community's fault necessarily. There are policy issues and other trends that are national. And you may see, oh, unemployment is down, jobs are up everywhere in the US. But in your county, you're thinking, oh, well, I'm the only one that's having this problem. But if you compare your county to similar counties, what you're going to find is that they're in similar situations economically. I think that's really, and that's a service to your audience, because they're going to understand what's happening in a different context. It's not just us, there's something else happening. So we can provide you with files that will tell you about metro and non-metro counties, which is the way one part of government defines it. The census defines it by actual population within a county and how urbanized or not they are, and there are percentages of rural population files that can tell you what's going on. And if you want to do something within your state, we could help you put together a file that would let you ID those counties and figure out a way to compare them routinely. So you just have to let Sarah know, and we can help you with that.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Yeah, like we said, it's not a brief discussion. That was not even the tip of the iceberg. It can go into some really boring detail, but it's important to give some thought to if you're going to do rural research or reporting. So the first thing that I mentioned was that you could do a comparison, and that's how I usually approach a data set once I've come to it for the first time. But once you've done that comparison, and you found kind of what the general trend looks like, if you're just looking at, okay, what's the non-metro or rural trend in my state, or what's the national rural trend about some data point, then you can pull out a second story from the same data set describing where rural places defied that statistic or that assumption or that general trend. So if it's true that rural counties had higher COVID rates, death rates, as we found in our red zone reports, then go find a cluster of rural counties that have the lowest death rates and investigate what's going on there. Do they have, does the population have access to healthcare at higher rates, at health insurance at higher rates? Do they have a higher population that's vaccinated? What's going on there? That will give you some ideas. And I like, this is one of my favorite angles because you're kind of turning the script on its head. Another way that I've done this is looking at median home prices. So the rural median home value is lower than the urban one, but I thought it was really interesting to look at where that's not true. And so I wrote a piece called "Pandemic Exacerbates Affordable Housing Shortages in Colorado Ski Towns," and I found that in Pitkin County, which is where Aspen is, the ski resort, the average home sells for over $4 million, and in the actual town limits of Aspen, it's more than that. So it's really interesting to look at the places that are going to surprise you and surprise your readers and surprise your community. Then if you're working at the local level and you're not reporting on national issues, then it might be interesting to find out a way in which your community is different from the prevailing stereotype or statistic. A way that you could turn that script on its head again is to find out where rural and urban are the same then. And so one of the things that I realized that I was assuming a lot when I came to a data set was that, oh, I'm going to find some big difference between rural and urban people on whatever topic it is. And one of those was, I was looking at the cooperative election survey, and I wanted to see the share of the population that regularly attends religious services. And so I was surprised to find that there's not really that much of a difference at all between urban and rural religious service attendance. And so I think that's maybe surprising to more people than just me. And so I think turning the stereotype on its head again and saying, okay, well then what causes differences in service attendance? And, I found that it kind of felt along other demographic and political lines, some of them expected, some of them unexpected. And then, or maybe there's an economic metric where rural or a certain rural place is doing better than urban places. The stereotype is that rural is worse off, where is rural doing better? And so I think kind of as a general rule, might be interesting to figure out what your assumptions are, either about rural America in general or about your geographic area of interest in particular, and then find out if that assumption is even true to begin with. And then if it is, find the outliers where that assumption is not true, where that statistic is not true. Go find the unexpected story. So I think that's all I had for today. I think I will hand it back over to Caroline.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, all of you, Sarah, Megan, and Tim. I have the enviable job here of listening to my friends and colleagues talk about things that they're really good at. I just get to invite them onto the screen. And so it's always really exciting when we can share these sorts of things about how we're looking at rural, how we're defining rural, how we're analyzing it. I love the stuff that the tools that Megan shared are incredible, and I know our reporters outside of Sarah even consult Headwaters for different things, and these ways that you can turn assumptions and look at rural differently that Sarah was talking about are great. We have a few minutes for questions, and there were a couple in the chat, and I saw one for Megan, I believe, that are you able to partner with researchers to analyze newly collected local or regional data that may be part of an ongoing research project? Is that something Headwaters does, or can you speak to that? I'm not sure. Oops, I think you're muted.
There's always one. Yes, we do. We have done several kind of long-running partnerships with like reporting projects with journalists. We work with universities, we work with agencies. Yeah, we're open to lots of different ways of collaborating. So I encourage folks to reach out.
Wonderful. I believe the next one is for me and Tim and Sarah about which definition we use at the Daily Yonder for rural. Tim, do you want to take a stab? I mean, I know there is an answer. It's not a stab.
Our go-to is the Office of Management and Budget Metropolitan Statistical Area List, the OMB, and they say over and over again, don't use this for anything else except to measure statistics within metropolitan areas. Without fail, it gets used in grant programs as a rural definition, research, you name it. And the reason is because it's at the county level and it's a yes/no binary system. So that makes it really simple for journalists who can't, if you wait on the census, it's a 10-year track to figure out what's rural, and then it's part of a county, so you can't really analyze it with Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers because those come at the county level. But the Office of Management and Budget Metropolitan Statistical Area, we use the non-metropolitan counties as our surrogate for rural. There will be a new list. It's either out or will be out shortly. They refine it every 10 years after the census, and it's about time for that to come back out.
Excellent. I see a question in the chat about whether there's a shortcut for identifying rural communities that buck certain trends, or whether you really just have to dig into the data. And I don't know, Sarah, Megan, Tim, I believe any of you could probably speak to this, but I'll let whoever wants to jump in go for it.
I can. I think yes and no. I think it depends on how comfortable you are with spreadsheets, I think, or using, we used a software called Data Wrapper for our graphics, and it's a really easy way to make a quick county level map or any other, state level map or something like that. It's not super complex. I think anyone can learn how to use it with a YouTube tutorial. But so sometimes what I'll do is I'll have a spreadsheet of maybe, median home prices for every county in the US. And if I want to see where rural is different, I might just put all of those rural counties on a map in Data Wrapper just for me to look at and then see, okay, it's going to show, really high home values that are really saturated, darker color. And I'll just go hover over those counties and figure out where that is. If you don't want to use Data Wrapper, or if you'd rather just stay in a spreadsheet, you could filter by rural place. And so what I usually do before I do anything else is join whatever data set that I'm using to the non-metro metro list of counties that we use. And so then I have a column in my data that's county type, and I'll say I'm going to filter for only non-metropolitan, which is kind of a proxy that we use for rural. And then I'll say I'm going to sort that median home price like largest to smallest or something. And so I want to see what is the rural county that has, or the top 100 rural counties or whatever you want, that has the highest home values. And so then you have an immediate list of places that you can start. And so that's how I do it. I don't know. Yeah, Megan, you also had yourself unmuted, but.
Yeah, we use a very similar approach. We use a different data product. We use Tableau, but it's the same, like you enter data into it kind of when we're in that exploratory kind of phase to see it visually, whatever it is we're looking at, whether it's, flood risk or housing prices or poverty, and inevitably stuff pops up. And some things we look for, like, okay, we can explain this given what we already know, and also inevitably there's a what the heck is happening over here that merits further investigation. So yeah, we often do start with just mapping things and letting our geographers' brains go wild.
I love the image of just geographers' brains unleashed. There's a question asking, what are some strategies for researchers to get into the space of providing and interpreting supporting data for journalists? So I guess, Megan, how do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know, maybe this is also a question for Tim, like how, how Headwater, we try to be of service, I think would be the easiest. The easiest way to answer that. And so we get, we try to do the most rigorous, objective research that we can, and we work hard to share it widely so that our, reporting and journalist friends know about it. And then, over time, we have built up our credibility and our relationships with folks. And so, they know that we tend to be very responsive. We try to respect deadlines. We know that you all are working, kind of the restriction or limits that you're working under. And so we try to respect that and be really responsive. So I think it's, it's been a matter of being a reliable partner over years, and someone that I think reporters know that they can lean on, either when they're trying to find data context for a story, or even like way upstream when they're starting to kind of suss out where a story might be. We also have some of those relationships where we kind of help brainstorm given what we know from the data.
Our joke within the Center for Rural Strategies, which publishes the Daily Yonder, is to feed them what they eat, feed journalists what they eat. And that's, you know, we eat news. So the more we can tie data to current events, the more interested journalists will be, and the easier it is to say, oh, I see how this is a story. And I know a lot of times, I just love the trend stories, and they're not necessarily tied to a specific policy. And I get excited about that, but I kind of nerd out on it. I don't news out on it necessarily. And so being able to tie data to policy, there are journalists who are excellent at that. I'm not really one of them. But looking at the news and saying, what's going on here that I have information on that would be useful for someone wanting to write on this topic, the incidence of SNAP benefits, changes in demographics, immigration as a, you know, that's always a news story. So there's some things, thinking like what does a news person need? Another way that I think might be helpful, depending on your media market you're trying to penetrate, would be to write, contribute op-eds or things like that to media that explain what you're doing in a way that's accessible for a general audience, and then that kind of gets you in front of journalists. There's another, I'm sure some of you participate in an organization called The Conversation, which adapts academic research into general readership pieces. That might be something to investigate. And if your university is part of that group, I think you are able to participate with that to adapt your research directly into commentary, op-ed, analysis type pieces. And take any opportunity to talk to journalists, even if they're not on your topic, and to help them find sources. There's nothing more useful than someone who will help you find sources. I'm not that person, but I know these three people who could. That's always really useful. And if you get a reputation for being helpful that way, then you'll be asked more.
I think this is it on the questions, which means we are really in perfect timing. That doesn't always happen, so I'm really excited about that. I just want to thank you all for attending, for your insightful questions. Of course, the panelists that I have convinced, bribed, and otherwise forced to show up here. No, I'm just kidding. We've had a great time talking about this, making this happen for all of you.
And the only other thing is we hope you'll join us for the next one in 2024. We will send out an email when we've got the next Rural Journalism Collective on the calendar. But thank you everyone for showing up today and nerding out on some data with us, and just really appreciate all the panelists and you, Caroline. So thanks again, everybody. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.